Do more by doing less. With me, Charles Alexander, for small business owners, startups, and busy folks. Billy Samoa, tell me, look, I told you this earlier. I normally don't get folks going to a ton of backstory because everybody's here to learn everything else, but yours is interesting and impactful enough. Can you give us the Cliff Notes version of the big companies you were working for and then what you did instead?
Yeah, well, I'll be brief. I know it's a 25 minute show. I got started in the renewable industry space after 10 years in the entertainment biz. I made a movie. The movie did well, won awards, got picked up for distribution. But as I reflected on the 7 years it took to make the movie, I said I didn't make 7 years worth of income. I said, what do I do now to support my family? Worked for a small solar company. We grew it to be the 5th largest. That elevated me to have a lot of cool jobs, including training, managing, leading teams. I ended up working for a company called SolarCity, which was the biggest solar company in the country. And I built SolarCity TV, which was an internal TV show for them to broadcast announcements and updates and help the sales team. As things would evolve, SolarCity was acquired by Tesla, which gave me a unique opportunity to create their onboarding program. I didn't really have one. So I built the onboarding program from scratch, left there as the head of sales and product training. When I left, I said, how do I combine my love of teaching and training and learning with my creative spirit? And a podcast was a great fit. And so I started my own podcast. This is 2019.
Okay.
Yeah. So I started Inside Out. It's this podcast where I wanted to gather insights from people who I thought were interesting. I interviewed a lot of people that I met at Tesla and other leaders. It's more of a leadership podcast. It sort of evolved into more of a business podcast. I still do this podcast today. And what I realized is I needed help. And so much to the point of your show, it's like, how do you do more by doing less? I was doing too much of the work myself. I hired a video editor, audio editor, designer, a copywriter, social media person. And I realized if I need help with my show, other people need help with their shows. I built a bigger team and created a business, Potify, which we do all the nuts and bolts of podcast production, podcast marketing, and monetization. So those are the 3 legs of the stool. It's production, marketing, and monetization of podcasts and really any form of media.
I've got 15 questions about Potify, and for no other reason, for my own selfish purposes. But look, so let me back up a second. When you left, why did you leave Tesla? I mean, what was in your mind? Like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Well, yeah,
I want to go to Mars.
Well, and sometimes the decision's not yours. What happened was I had a global role, and Elon's a very flat org type of guy. I had people in APAC, in Europe, in North America that reported up to me, and I could see the handwriting on the wall that I had a position that was, in his mind, not needed. He said, you know what? And I was 1 layer removed from Elon. That's how close. My boss reported to him. And I knew she was having a conversation with him. And by the way, I was looking for my exit ramp the entire time. And not to say that I didn't like working at Tesla. I loved it. But I wanted to do my own thing. I never envisioned getting into corporate. This was my exit ramp. And I was pleased to get the phone call while I was at an airport on a trip for Tesla. And my boss said, hey, your position's been eliminated. Now, I could have quite easily migrated to the sales team. I could have got another corporate job, but this was my chance to do my own thing.
When you're doing that, you say you moved straight into a podcast and then you got so busy. Forgive the dumb question or maybe intrusive question. Were you making money on the podcast? Were you making money in some other way before Potify that you started hiring people? Good
question, man. This is a good level set for anyone that is starting a podcast. And I'm just going to be blunt about this. 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, a podcast is not a business.
Correct.
By itself. Now, there are exceptions, there are outliers, and I could list off when that happens. And I don't want to I don't want people to be discouraged and not start a podcast because they think, oh, I can't turn it into something that makes money. You can, it happens in other ways. But to answer your question, I left, I had severance.
Gotcha.
I was fortunate enough to have gotten a lot of stock. I built enough of a nest egg to where I could afford to not work. I will say I made the mistake of day trading the year after I left Tesla. It was not good. Not good. Look, man, I'm an open book. I did really well. I mean, in a lot of ways, but I would have done a lot better if I just fell asleep after leaving Tesla and kept all my Tesla shares, because I had Tesla at a relatively low, like I had a pretty big amount of shares, but compared to what the stock did after I left, where it just went nuts. But you live and learn, and money is only one metric. And if we get too consumed with that, I think we're looking at the wrong things.
Dude, I can tell you, and that's for a complete side note. I have a bunch of financial advisor listeners from my explainer videos that I create for financial advisors. But that's the big thing. Like you could fall asleep. You could just pick the S&P whatever, even though it's not that diversified, and then never do anything with it, and you'll be fine. Everybody, I got buddies right now on a text that are trying to blow up, getting in and out of the hot stocks of the moment. And I even hesitate to say which ones, because this will probably air a month or two after we talk, and it'll be completely different, but they'll be crying in their soup. I don't know why they're doing soup, but I don't know what else they'd be crying in. Look, dude, you move over, you're podcasting, you're starting to grow the thing. Now that you have Potify, what is some of the steps? Actually, let's start back up a little bit. Why would somebody ever want to start a podcast? What would be some of the initial things they need to consider when doing this?
I think the number one reason people start podcasts is they feel that they have something inside them that they want to share, and they have almost a visceral need to share their thought leadership, their domain expertise, a story, or other people's stories. And by virtue of doing that, it will help them with their own personal brand, or it can help with their company. And so they use it as a lead channel or marketing channel. That's the reason I see most people are starting a podcast. Now, for those who want to start a podcast where they think the podcast is going to make money, this is where I go into like numbers. It's like, if you look at advertising, which few podcasts can do, you're looking at $15 to $50 for every 1,000 downloads. The mathematician in me knows that doesn't pencil for most shows. The average show gets 133 downloads. That's the average. 50% or less than that, 50% or more than that. The top 1% are doing about 30,000 downloads an episode. And so you could see even the top 1% of podcasts, you just do the math, 15 or $50 times 30, it's not a lot. And so the sponsorship route, that could work, but it's got to be a highly targeted demographic. You need to know who your audience is. And then, you don't need as many downloads, because you could tell a compelling story to a prospective sponsor and let them know, hey, if you sponsor us, you're going to talk to this audience. It could be a very hyper-specific niche. And that works really well. So again, that's why people do it. They're mostly doing it because it's a branding tool, a thought leadership tool, a lead mechanism, a marketing tool or marketing vehicle. But the thing I love, and I think Jay Klaus said this, a podcast is a loyalty platform. It's a loyalty platform. It's not an outreach platform. It helps you get more loyal audience than anything else.
You said what the average is, like $1.50 per.
Yeah.
And looking at that, and this is a trick question that you're going to say, well, it depends. But I've had seen so many people that I know personally, they're the 8 episode and then pull the ripcord. What do they call it?
Pod fade.
I love the way you just said it. Yeah, pod fade. They do 8 and like nobody's listening. But I've been told by some very smart people that you're not into just download, not into months. You might even get beyond the, how long do you think it normally takes for somebody to be in doing this before they can start creeping up to the whatever, 50, 100, 150?
Sometimes never. I mean, that's you're talking about 50,000 or how they creep up in the number?
150 an episode.
Oh, sorry. Okay. That's a different story. You could do that through just grind, through posting on the social platforms, letting your friends and family know about it, more of the grassroots, going to groups, Facebook groups that have interested people in your niche. That's just blood, sweat, tears to get to that point. Now, getting beyond that point, that's when you got to look at paid media campaigns. You got to look at collaborative efforts, getting in front of what I call a shared audience. If I'm talking about community building, I want to get on every thought leader who talks about community building. I want to get on their show. So that my show, if it's about community building, I am now in front of an audience that is unfamiliar with me, that becomes familiar with me. Podcast listeners listen to other podcasts. The more podcasts you go on that are in your niche, that are in your subject, the more they're going to know about you. And then they might decide, hey, I want to listen to this guy. I want to know what he's all about.
Do you think it's recommended for somebody to go on a similar type of show? And I guess that's what you're just saying, with a similar niche, or is it?
Yes.
And I've also heard other people say, well, what you want to do is go into similar audiences, but maybe slightly different topics, because they may already be bought into whoever the host is and not who you are. But you're shaking your head at me.
I would say it's not a either or, it's an and. Do both. I don't think there's nothing wrong with going on a show that they speak to the exact same audience. Maybe the show is very similar to yours.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. And if they'll have you, obviously they might say, oh, I don't want this person. But I see the podcast space as a lot more collaborative and not as like competitive. Yeah, sure. Anything's competitive, but I think most of the time a podcast host will want somebody that has knowledge on the topic that their show's about, so that they can bring new perspective, new ideas.
Do you have any tips for folks that want to be a podcast guest?
Yes, I have a lot of tips, and I've written about this. The first thing about being a podcast guest is it needs to be very, very clear how you add value to the shows that you want to go on. What are your 5 to 10 core areas that you could speak to without any prep or thought? You already know how to do those things. So write those things down. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, you need to understand like who your core audience is, or who you're speaking to. Find shows that speak to a similar audience. So make a short list or even a long list of those shows. When you're doing outreach, make it about the host first and explain to them what you like about their show. Be very specific. It shouldn't be a boilerplate outreach. Figure out ways to do outreach in multiple ways. So if I'm sending an email to somebody, that's great, but it would be even better if I was commenting on their LinkedIn post, if I was commenting on their Instagram post, if I was making myself known to them by supporting them. And then when the time is right, I send them a direct message on Instagram or maybe an email, and I say, I love your work. I especially appreciate your episode where you talked about X, Y, or Z. You tell them a little bit about yourself, give them an example of something you've done, tell them what topics you think you would want to talk about on their show, make it real for them. And then who knows, maybe they'll say yes, but you got to also realize that not everybody is going to say yes. So it does become a little bit of a numbers game, as long as you're not doing a numbers game where it's spray and pray, scorched earth, and you just send a blanket email that's the same for everybody.
I get those daily, and I'm not taking anything away from the podcast or the lovely people who listen or watch, but this is not the top 10 in entrepreneurship, dude. We're not getting 1 million downloads per episode, but I feel like I get 1 million pitches per week that are all over the place. Listen to your show, love it. So here's what I do. I'm in sales training. Yeah, this not a sales training show, brother. And you'll get just this, it's terrible. What you're saying is pick out whatever it is, 10, 20. So for me, I'm do more by doing less. I could talk to people who are in productivity, time management, work-life balance, burnout, insert whatever here. Go actually listen to, maybe not even the whole thing, but some clips of their shows, and then go comment on them, connect with them, like some of the stuff they're doing. And if it still seems like it's going to be a fit, maybe later make a pitch. And when I make a pitch, then say, hey, listen to this episode. I liked this line. By the way, I teach 4-day work week, time freedom, and turn a few loose like that.
Yeah, you make it easy for them to make a decision when they like you, when they know you, when they feel a connection to you, right? Like, and that happens through multiple touch points. Again, all the social media touch points, and then, some sort of message. And I like to say it's an offer, not an ask. Gotcha. So you can't come across desperate. If you come across with, and it's, doesn't apply because it's not sales commission, Brett, but in this case, I want to be your get. You got to be a peer. You don't want to be groveling and like overly kiss up to them. But as if you're a peer, you're gonna give them props. You're gonna come in with confidence, and you're gonna tell them like what you like about their show, but also like how you could benefit their audience. And the more you know their audience for your show, it's like to your point, you tap into those things that are going to apply directly to your audience. If I've written a book that highlights something about time management, of course, that's going to be a natural fit and something that's going to make a whole lot of sense.
So let me back up. So if I'm getting ready to start a podcast, what are some of the very first steps outside of making the decision on the niche and how often I want to do it or why I want to do it? Like literally, are there some technical things I'm overlooking? Are there some content creation things I'm overlooking? Do I need to solo? Do I need to guest? What do I need to do?
Yeah, this is a great. How much time do we have? No. So first things first, go get the book "Make Noise." I love this book by Eric Newsom. Eric Newsom, Nuzum. Eric, first name. Make Noise will help set the stage. The second thing is, yes, concept matters significantly. So you want to make sure that your concept serves whatever the outcomes are that you've determined why you want to do the show. So get grounded in intention, figure out your goals. Like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to be the next Joe Rogan? Am I doing this to get leads? Am I doing this, whatever that is? Make those, if this podcast is successful, then X. What are those? What's in X? Write those out and then figure out a way to reverse engineer your way to get there. Now, the question then becomes, do you do it on your own or do you need a trainer, a podcast trainer?
Sure.
Somebody that's done it before, like me or somebody like me that has been down it. Now, you could go out and you could research and you could do trial and error. That's fine. If you're on a budget, do that. There's plenty of resources out there. If your listeners need a resource, I have a guide that's like a 21-step guide that will walk them through all of the things you need to think about. And I get it. Not everybody has a budget to work with somebody, but if you do, it can help. Now, when you think of like the pitfalls or the things that you should be thinking about, for me, all roads lead back to what you want your show to do. And therefore, creating something that's going to stand out will be a unique addition to the podcast ecosystem and allow you to, it's got to have a little it factor. I use the s'mores effect. Marshmallow's great, graham crackers great, chocolate's great, but you put them together and you get magic. Yeah. And so the same reason a Hollywood producer says it's this movie meets this movie, they're creating something that's shareable. Sure. Like we have a show that we produced that was called What Would Ted Lasso Do? It was a leadership podcast looking at it through the lens of Ted Lasso. Sure. And so just try to think creatively about what's going to give your show that it factor. And then from there, you do all the nuts and bolts to get the show launched. It's not hard. You just need to know the steps of the process.
So what would Ted Lasso do?
Hey, man.
He wouldn't drink tea. Look, man, I had to go back. Side note, we had to go. We missed it on Hulu. Had to go back, get the Apple subscription, rammed through it, and it almost makes me want to go back and get it again. Anyway, but in looking at doing that, you talk a lot about storytelling. So how much does somebody balance storytelling with actionable advice when they're doing a podcast or any content?
Well, stories create emotion and they're memorable. So when you tell a story, it brings to life an insight in a way that just saying the insight wouldn't, because one, people will remember it. Two, it connects emotionally to the human condition because we're all humans and we relate to the human experience. So a story should have tension and release and all the nuts and bolts that you would see in a traditional story. But in order for you, if you're a podcaster, to get stories or to tell stories, you need to listen and look for stories. Right. So when I do my research, the thing I do is I look for something about this person that I think is very human. I'll give you an example. I interviewed a guy, funny enough, it's a guy who went on 60 podcasts in like 6 months. And how many? 60. I asked, and it may have been 90 days. I can't remember, but I have it. I did a whole interview where I asked him about his process or where I walked through his process. But the reason I share this particular guy's story is not because of the interviews, although that is he had a good approach, which I break down in one of my episodes. I could share a link so you could share it with the listeners. But the reason I bring it up is I started the interview by reading a letter that his dad wrote to him before he died.
Oh gosh.
Now, he didn't expect it. I read this and I go, who wrote that? And he goes, my dad. My dad wrote that. He goes, I've never heard anybody share that. How did you get that? And he had done this in a Facebook post like 7 years earlier. And I went back and I found it. And so he then told the story about his dad and how his dad influenced him. And his thing, his secret sauce, this guest is play in the workspace, adopting and adapting play into our lives and how important it is. And he was able to tell the story about how that became to be something that was so important to him because I lowered I gave them an opportunity to share something very personal and unique to him and tell a story. So being able to tell a story is not always your own ability to tell a story, but it's being able to tee people up to tell their story.
Dude, that's for anybody that's going to have guests or you have guests, that is a fantastic way to be memorable to the person that you interviewed. And I have to assume that they become a much more side effect, not the reason you do it, but the side effect is that they're going to be more likely to share the podcast and to promote it and, be hopefully a friend or a referral source down the road, right?
100%. It's connecting in a way that very few other experiences as a podcast guest would have provided. I try to find something funny, unique, interesting, emotional. So another guy I interviewed, I know he created a business called Sweet Fish Media because he loves Swedish fish. So I started off, I go, do you mind if I have a few of these? And I started the interview and I poured some Swedish fish in my mouth and he started cracking up. But again, it's like you find things about people and then you show them that you care. Research equals respect. Research equals respect. And when you take the time to research somebody, it shows that you respect them.
So does me telling you I spent 10 minutes trying to figure out how to pronounce your last name?
Yeah, man. I appreciate that.
I should have known that out of the gate.
No, it's hard sometimes, but I do what you did, right? You got to go, you got to listen, find a show where somebody says it, but then how do you know they said it correctly?
And then the Sweet Fish guy, that's not contact marketing. Oh,
yeah, content marketing. James Carberry. I'm probably pronouncing his last name incorrectly. Yeah, I think it is called content.
Oh,
is it content marketing? James. Yeah,
it'll be worth a Google.
Yeah.
Okay. These guys, they wrote a book on the whole thing. Great example, which brings me into the segue of your podcast, Insight Out. Mm-hmm. How long has that been going on now? For 5 years?
September. Yeah, 5 years.
Look at me. See, that's the research kicking in right there.
Yeah.
So Holly, I mean, what are some of these nuggets that you find as you've interviewed all of these hyper successful people that you see an overlap in over and over again that got them to where they are?
That's a really interesting question. Themes are definitely there. One theme and it's a theme, but there's one particular episode that I come back to is actually my cousin. I interviewed my cousin and I am a perfectionist.
Yeah.
Bottom line, and I'm a recovering perfectionist. But what he shared is this thought about thinking in versions. I think all too often we try to put out the best, most perfect version first, which is kind of crazy.
Oh, good call.
If we understand that we put out version 1 because it's version 1, so that we can get feedback, so that we can iterate, so that we can figure out why it's not version 10. If we try to put out version 10 first, we were actually harming ourselves because now we've missed all that valuable feedback that we would get by doing version 1, which is an MVP, and then version 2, and then version 3, and so forth. And so this unlock for me was a game changer. To think in versions gave me permission to make messy progress, to put something out first that isn't necessarily the final version 10, the perfect version that I was hoping I'd put out as my first version.
Dude, that's fantastic. So thinking what version are you in now?
Dude, early versions, man. I feel like I got a lot more versions to go. So, another thing and I'll just share this because I think it's important. If you've ever looked in, this is for your show, especially, you look at the time matrix. So I interviewed Corey Kogan and I've interviewed Stephen M.R. Covey, a lot of people in the Franklin Covey world. I interview So, the time matrix, when we look at things that are, important and urgent, and important, not urgent, important, but not urgent. And you got the four. So you look at the second quadrant, which is the important and not urgent.
Correct.
As a business owner, this is where you need to be. This is where you have exponential impact on your business, because you got to work you do the important and urgent, and you're treading water in its triage mode. Mm-hmm. But it's the important, not urgent, that often gets denied the time that you need to put into it, so that you have fewer of the items in version 1, which is the important and urgent. And so this concept is such a valuable concept, because what we do as business owners is we're like a fly to a light. We're going to the thing that needs us the most, the fastest. Right. But in reality, if we dedicated more time to the important but not urgent, we would then get so much more value out of that time. It's like a multiple, whereas the important and urgent is like a 1-to-1. The important and not urgent is like a 1-to-30, right? You're getting like 30x the time you put in. And so I'm paraphrasing here, but to me, that's a really valuable insight when we think of time management, which is really self-management. How do we manage ourselves? I don't believe in time is time. You manage yourself and how your relationship with time.
Well, that's a good segue into my little softball question I always wrap up with. What are some things you should be doing less of right now that are probably in that not urgent, not important quadrant?
Yeah, the bottom two. Yeah, those are the time sucks. Yeah. Great questions. Prospecting is something that I need to do, but it's something that I could get support with. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that comes to mind. I think the nuts and bolts, when I look at my business development engine, the revenue generating side of my business, I need to find podcasters, right? People who either want to start a podcast or who have a podcast, they need production support. And we've done really well at finding these people, doing outreach and meeting people, getting to know them. And so there's the opener and I'm the closer. I should spend most of my time doing the closing, the follow-up.
Yep.
And the opening, there's lots of ways you could do that. We have a cold email campaign. We have a ad campaign. We're pointing people to a landing page. We do outreach on LinkedIn. And sometimes I get too in the weeds on the opening when I should spend more of my time immersing myself in the closing, but more importantly, the follow-up. Follow-up is where it's at.
Yeah.
That's everything. If you're great at follow-up, you're great at sales. If you suck at follow-up, you suck at sales. The more you do follow-up, the better. And it's not to say that the opening is not important. It is important, but I don't need to do all of that myself. That's why I have a team to help with that. Sometimes I think I do that as opposed to doing the follow-up.
You need to do less of the initial prospecting, top of the funnel stuff. You need to be the closer. You need to be the guy that's doing the follow-up.
Yeah. That's one big bucket. I'd say, if you look at like the landscape of my day and where I'm spending my time, I'd say content creation. It's funny because I help people with content creation, sure. But the shoe, they say that the
cobbler's kids have no shoes.
That's what gets pushed aside. That's my important, not urgent is doing those things. So it's like, I need to be spending more time on content creation, more time creating guides and podcasts and YouTube videos, and probably less time in the operational side of the business that I have team members to help with that. That's another big, it's a big area, but I think we as humans, we're and doers and action takers, we're going to take action instead of like saying, wait a second, by me doing this, by saying yes to this, I'm saying no to something else. And we got to constantly be asking that question. What are we saying no to because we've said yes to this?
Dude, that's great way to wrap that up, because I even have a podcast episode on that. Every time you say yes to one thing, you say no to two other things. And I know that you've got this, you've got your hand in on several things. This will be a part where I hope I don't have to edit out, but you've also got personal things you do. Was baseball coaching part of that, or getting into the middle of what your son's up to?
Yeah, man, it's great research there. So yeah, my son is a 12-year-old. I've been coaching his little league team since he was 3. Well, at that time it was T-ball, but yeah, he's now graduated from little league, but he's still doing travel ball. But I'm not the coach. And I wouldn't trade it for a thing.
Yeah.
But if I'm being blunt, it's a huge time commitment, man. 30, 40 hours a week when all-star season's happening. Yeah, it is. It's a full-time job. What does get compromised is my business. It's crazy to me to see the last month and a half since All-Stars ended, how much more time I have to spend on the business. And don't get me wrong, I'm still a dad. I still do things with the family, and there's still things that there always is things that pull your attention. And I'm a bit of a golden retriever, squirrel. I'm looking at the shiny things. You got to, when I say you, I'm speaking to myself here. You got to like remember sometimes it's okay to say no. Yeah. Sometimes it's okay to not do those things. But then there's other times where you do need, it is a yes. And it's okay that you're going to not do this business thing right now. It's the world is, life is more than those things, man.
Fantastic. Billy, how can somebody find you?
Well, I'm active on LinkedIn. I'll be more active actually in the upcoming weeks and months. So go find me on LinkedIn. Just type in Billy Samoa. As you can see my name's a little bit hard to spell. So just type in Billy Samoa, and then go to Potify. If you do have a podcast, want to launch a podcast, have questions about podcasts, we have a lot of resources, tools, ways in which you can learn. Even if you are a client of ours, we try to support anyone who's on the journey of content creation, media creation. It doesn't need to be a podcast. It could be a YouTube channel. And then you could, there's ways you could meet me there. Just get a schedule, a strategy call, and we could talk.
Potify is a fantastic resource. Billy is easy to get in touch with, as in I stalked him and asked him to meet and then impressed him enough to get him on the show. Great dude, man. Billy, I appreciate it. Lots of information in there. Have a good day, sir, and hope we can chat again soon.
It's an absolute pleasure, Charles. I'm a big fan, and you're doing great work, and grateful for the chance to share these few minutes together today to talk, and do it again in a second. Keep doing the great work you're doing, helping people do more by doing less.
Thanks, bud. If you're an entrepreneur, solopreneur, advisor, agent, or freelancer, listen up. You'd rather do what you love, spend more time with family, friends, traveling, exercise, sleep. Have the time to do what you want instead of putting out fires, fighting never-ending to-do lists, checking email at 9 p.m., then go to yourcharlesalexander.com. I've created the toolkit you need with all the bells and whistles to help you streamline your workflow without sacrificing your income. Just go to yourcharlesalexander.com, scroll to the bottom, grab the exclusive toolkit, and start seeing results right away, and take the first step toward a more balanced work life. And as always, if you don't, an angel may actually lose its wings. True story. Have a great day.